Live. Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting order. The Jackson County Board of Commissioners. Today is a budget work session. We don't have a formal agenda because there's not a lot to really discuss, but we do want to go through a couple of items. And one of the items I'm just going to bring up first, if I guess that's okay, I asked Don and Darlene to take in get us some numbers together in a continuation of the discussion that we've been having with emergency services, the fire departments. I know we're looking at giving them some additional support, a fund set aside to help incentivize membership. And in doing that, we wanted to also make sure that we're not forgetting our two rescue squads, and I had some conversations with Unit 1 Rescue Squad Chief, Captain, and then I think Don has had some conversation with the Glenville Cashers, and they too are struggling. And I know we looked at the fire side of the picture the other day because that's all within the fire budget, but there is a need to make sure that those folks with the rescue squads are made whole as well, and that they're getting the same level and opportunities that were given to the fire side. And so I'd ask staff to look to see if there is some funds available and what could we do. And so I'll just turn it over to Don and let him explain what they've been able to figure out, or Darlene or whoever.
Darlene's going to hand out some information.
And just, yeah.
That's good. Thank you.
So what we're going to discuss is this is going off the premise that both rescue squads would receive one full-time employee, and then also go off the premise that they would receive some type of pay per call, and that really mirrors this. Mr. Chairman, I believe this is what you requested. What mirrors similar to what we requested for the fire departments. And so what you have in front of you initially is the ambulance rescue squad budget itself. And I'd like to draw your attention to, let's see, it's going to be line item 114370 49005. It said rescue squad unit number 2 building. Everybody see that? Right next to it says 129,475.
Yes.
Okay. And then you can see the next column says 147,687. Okay. So this goes back to if you recall that the Glenville Cashers Rescue Squad had come before the board and requested the board to help fund an additional building in regards to their needs. And as everybody's aware, we've had the rescue squad had an ongoing lawsuit in which has been settled, and they're also continuing to have conversations in regards to the property there where they're proposing to locate a building. At this point, I know that they're looking at alternative solutions, and they're going to be in conversations in the next year in regards to how and where the next facility should be located and built. It really comes down to why they're wanting that additional facility is for response time. And basically, if you don't know, their current facility is located next to Blue Ridge School, yes, basically down the mountain a little bit, down the incline there a little bit. And so they're trying to get closer to Cashers and other areas, response areas. So at this point, this has been budgeted for 3 years now. And just so you know, this money is just being reserved at this point for that conversation. And when they come back and come to you and communicate the facility needs, then I believe that this Jackson County has committed to assist them. So having said that they're not, I don't really believe they're going to be able to come back within next fiscal year with a true plan, or at least a true plan to the point where they're borrowing money at that point. So we will have another year of this money's being basically budgeted but not being expended. So these monies could be available to be reallocated elsewhere for a single year, but just remember that ultimately, I believe this board has committed to assisting the rescue squad with the building of their building. So I just want to point out that there's funds there potentially available to help in these conversations, at least for one year. So if you go to the next page, what you just see is you see the potential cost associated with those two positions. Those positions would be classified at the same grade as the fire coordinator position. And so you could see if two full-time rescue services coordinator positions created, it would be recommended to be at the same grade as the fire coordinator position. If you go to the next page, ultimately what you see is the overall cost associated with those two positions, which between the salary and also the benefits would be $108,597. And then the next page would be the actual call counts. And from the call counts, we just try to base some estimates of how many people would show up per call, and then try to come up with a price per call per person. And we believe that $12 per call, on average about 5 people showing up per call, that about $35,000 would be enough to cover these calls. So in essence, the overall cost for this would be approximately the $35,000 plus the $108,000 that we're talking about for the personnel. And so going back to the beginning, at this point, we still have the $147,000 allocated for debt service payment. And so that would be available for next year. But again, when the rescue squad comes back and asks for whatever facility they're asking for, then we would have to make up these costs elsewhere. Now, the only other alternative would be obviously to either look at additional revenues or to look at cutting expenses elsewhere.
Well, I appreciate the work y'all did in putting this together, and it does exactly meet what I requested. And as a follow-up, I feel comfortable utilizing the existing funds that have been set aside for rescue services to pay for this expense. It was a part of an overall budget increase that we adopted as a board a couple of board terms back. And we said this money would be set aside for public service use, for public emergency services use in our county. And while it wouldn't be utilized immediately for a rescue squad building payment, it's still in the same vein or in the same line or thought process. It's going towards providing emergency service response in our communities. And so we're still keeping with what we had said when we adopted that for the budget cycle previously. And we don't know, I feel hopeful that Global Cashiers will move forward with a building, but they've had some challenges. They're still trying to think about what they want in the future and what's best for their organization. And I'm committed 100% to helping them, as I was just as committed a couple of years ago when we signed that letter of intent that we would support them then. I would be willing to do that in the future. So it gives them an opportunity to have some time and not feel pressured that they have to respond immediately, but to be very methodical and thoughtful and work through this in planning stage in their community to come up with a good plan, and then I'll be glad to support it.
I'm in agreement too, Mr. Chairman. And Friday, we got the county manager, Don Adams, and I got a little taste of the response time, or possibly lack of response time in Cashier for traffic. And that new facility where it's going to be located strategically closer to Sapphire, 107 South, even 64 West is important, because there's no way emergency vehicles can get by with the traffic that it is already started. We saw a tremendous line of traffic that it was on Friday afternoon, and Memorial Day weekend should be expected, but just ridiculous. And the first responders cannot get around the vehicles. There's some places, on 61-4 and 107, there is not a place to go to the sides of the vehicle and go through the small shoulders. So it's really important that we show that support.
I just have this question, and I think I know the answer, but I want to make sure. Macon Telecommunications and Macon EMS, is that in support of the part of Highlands that is in Jackson County? Okay. Do you know what the population, I'm just curious. What?
I don't know.
Okay, that's all right. Thank you.
Other questions?
So if the board is in agreement with this, you do, going back to the first page, I just want to point out that last column to the right. If you would notice that if you go down to that debt service line item, the 147,687 is no longer there. That's because if you go to the top of that column, you have your salaries and wages line item, and then all the benefits associated with it below that.
Okay.
So in essence, the funds have been transferred to pay for these discussions.
Any comments or questions? Any thoughts?
You need consensus on this?
Yeah. Tom? I mean, are you,
I'm just wondering, with this blank like that, does that mean that we have not voted on it yet? Where it says right here, budget approved 21 and 22, and then there's no amount in that box right there.
I think that's what you just explained, Don. Just explained that if you add up all these, which is salaries, proposed salaries.
Okay, so that'll bring you to the 147.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I
Yes,
see,
sir.
okay,
yeah.
I see, okay.
Zeroed that
So we
out.
zeroed that out, but that's what if you guys agree with this, that's with the understanding that what will happen probably next, not this coming fiscal year, but the fiscal year after, we're gonna have to come up with the money to go back into that blank area because they will, it's my understanding, their intentions are to come back next fiscal year to request assistance on a facility. So,
and this number was based upon the request that was given to us however many years ago.
Yeah, a few years ago.
Yeah, so I mean, it would be a different number.
So
At the time of the request, right.
And so just for the boards, if you go and look at the 147, and I believe it's 3 times over, right? Is it 3?
3 times.
3 times. So that's part of our fund balance that we have budgeted each year. And so when they do come back to you, it's going to be, we already have saved 147,687 times 3. It's already available for this conversation with them before we even start talking about any type of debt service. So the debt service, if they came back with the exact $1.9 million request again, well, the debt may be less, as long as the interest rates stay low. So that really
Yeah.
depends upon what the
That's a
interest
good
rates will be. But it'll be a different conversation for us at the time because we'll actually have some money saved. Or we do have some money saved.
Right.
That's in order the down payment help decrease the debt.
Right.
Well, and just looking at this chart, and I appreciate these visual aids because they help me a lot. But seeing the annual rescue calls, it was pretty steady in Cashers, and then in 2020, it's really jumped up. And I think that's just a reflection of the population increase and people staying there as opposed to just being seasonal. Is that correct, Commissioner Jones?
Yes. Oh, yes.
And these individuals with our rescue squads, they're one of their service areas that they provide is a really technical rescue. And when you get into swift water, you get into high angle, you get into deep water dives. So there's a lot of technical components to the kind of work they're doing. And the conversations that I've had with the captains and members is that, these technical programs and services require an extensive amount of training and prep and maintenance. And so here again, they're overloaded just like everybody else, trying to find ways to keep their heads above water and continue to provide the service. And so that's why they're reaching out for help. So going back to Commissioner Jones' question, consensus. So Tom, I'll just start with you. Okay with including this?
Sure.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Mr. D? Okay. Mr. Adams?
So for our staff goes, we just have a couple follow-up items. One would be going back to the Habitat for Humanity, Commissioner Woody. When you go back and look at the nonprofit book, in 2018-19, 3 families served, 19-20, 12 families served, 2021, 14 families estimated to be served this year, and then next year 15 to 20 families. That's all in Jackson County.
Oh, good. Okay, thank you for that, those numbers. I
Very
appreciate it. Is. And I figured they were doing, things.
And so I did have
It's nice to know.
Carrie, my
Yeah.
assistant, email them, and they said all that is in Jackson County. The only other thing that I wanted to point out to the board is if you will go to page 23 of if you'll go to page 23 of the budget. Page 23. Go back up, I'm sorry. We were there. Yeah. So you have on your screen, this is page 21 of your budget book, but does everybody see the engineered option permit 30% of fee subject to change? Can you see that on your screen? That's the only other fee schedule change that is being proposed. I mentioned to the board I'd come back and report to you. I did provide you a handout of the minutes of the committee, Miss Melissa McKnight and Alicia Farm, that the basis of what they're attempting to do in regards to changing that fee, the $95 doesn't appropriately reflect the amount of time that they spend on those types of permits. So this was in accordance with that General Statute 138-336. And again, this is the handout I handed out to the board. They're allowed to charge up to 30% of the cumulative total of the fees for that type of process. And this is something that also went before the Health Department board and was approved by the Health Department. So I'm doing what I told the board to do. I'll follow up with the other recommended changes for fees.
So it's going to go up 30% of $95.
No, it's 30% of the other fees. So it depends upon, it can change, but for example, they gave me if you use the engineered option, they gave me an example of a 2-bedroom residence improvement permit under their current permitting process is $240 plus $120 for construction authorization. So that's $360 for a 2-bedroom. If they use the engineered option, it would be 30% of that, which would be an additional $108. So in that particular situation, the fee went from $95 to $108.
Okay.
Now, obviously, what would happen in a larger commercial project, which is going to require more time for them also, then that permit fee is higher, and so the percentage of that fee will be higher also.
So these fees, these adjustments have already been incorporated in the budget that's been presented as the recommended budget.
Correct.
Yeah, we're
It's
just
in
highlighting
your-
today.
That's page 21
Yeah.
in the proposed budget. So out of your other fee schedules, other than the solid waste, this is the only other proposed change with that particular.
Any questions about that?
The next, I think Ms. Fox had handed out some information in regards to updating really a summary sheet of our costs. And so if you would go to that, we'll put it online here also. If you'll scroll down, let's see if you get the whole thing. All right. We'll stop right there for a second. I'll let Ms. Fox go through the information with you, but this is part of your proposed budget book. This really gives a summary of everything. So just real quick before I turn it over to Ms. Fox, just a reminder, this first line is the general fund. So it's the general fund proposal, $71,660,678. So if you remember my summary, I mentioned all these other funds that are in there. Some of them I do highlights of the funds, but there's a paragraph in my summary that just mentions the other funds. Well, this is a quick look of all those funds and proposed costs. And when you scroll down, what you do is once you add all of those up, it appears that there's a $95 million budget being proposed, but that's not the case because there are monies that transfer between these funds. So for example, and this is the simplistic version that I like to use, is that our solid waste fund has employees in which we pay insurance. Well, we have to, right now, if I'm not mistaken, that insurance cost is reflected in both sides, correct?
It is.
It's reflected in the solid waste fund, but it's also reflected up here in the self-insurance fund. So that's really double booking that. So in order to show what our actual, so there's a lot of those transfers going back and forth. Our actual total proposed budget, you have to remove those transfers. And so you can see a total proposed budget of the 70 or $78 million. And so I always want to go back to when people are trying to compare, I always like to recommend people go to this sheet in multiple budget years, because this gives you a really good year-to-year look. And so there was an article that was put out by Smoky Mountain by Ms. Hayes that ultimately.
Bowman,
I'm sorry?
Bowman.
Holly Bowman, she got married.
Oh, Ms. Bowman, I'm sorry.
I made that mistake the other day.
Okay, and ultimately what had happened was the transfers here were not appropriately reflected. If you go back to your original document, the original document is about $8 million versus $16 million, which overinflated the bottom total budget amount. And it was reported in the news, I think, that the budget increase from last year's adopted budget was about 17.5%. And so that is not an correct amount. It's more, what was that number on the general fund, Mark?
It was a 7.6% difference.
Yeah. So like on the general fund numbers, it's a 7.6% difference. So there is a proposed increase in the overall budget, but it's not 17%. And so, Ms. Fox, if you want to just talk about.
Okay, the transfers include the general fund transfers to other funds, which is $8,200,623. And that includes the transfers to school capital reserve, the Article 46 capital reserve, and the regular school capital reserve, and the county's capital reserve fund, the debt payments, clean water, real property revaluation, emergency telephone. And that number was what I had listed as interfund transfers. The self-insurance fund, the numbers are expensed from the other funds, and it's budgeted now separately. So those numbers are in two places. So you have to deduct those from it too. That's $7,475,994. And the debt payment on SC6 Health Science Building is transferred from the School Capital Reserve Fund 19 to the Debt Service Fund. So that's an additional $838,138. So that makes up the $16,514,755 to transfer.
So just wanted to get this information out to the board and also to the newspapers, and then they can ultimately run their numbers on this new information.
Any questions about this correction?
So just so I'm clear in my mind about, so our budget without duplication is $78,942,885.
That's correct.
But another thing to look at too, Commissioner Williams, is when people talk to you about property taxes. okay?
Yes.
It's the 71,666,678, because these other funds have different potential revenue sources. So when you're talking about property taxes, it's
Okay.
$71 million.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. That's, yeah. Well, I was at a meeting and someone asked from another county, asked me what our budget was. And I said, I can't tell you because I did not have clarity and I didn't want to misquote. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
And the sales tax, school capital reserve fund, since the sales tax has been so high, I think last budget you had 427 in there, and this year it's already $1,080,000, or this budget's $1,088,000. So that's a $500,000. There's little pieces of this budget that could look askew, but that's one of those areas. Would that be a fair statement?
That would be, the sales tax has increased.
Yes, and that's a very positive thing for our community. So,
Any other,
I believe that's everything from staff.
does anybody have any additional items they want to bring up? I know we're at the process now where tonight we will have a formal public hearing. And it gives us a chance to hear comments back from the general public. And tomorrow, there is no need for a meeting tomorrow unless there's another topic that needs to come up.
Not from staff.
So unless one of the commissioners has something they want to bring up in addition to what's been presented, tomorrow would be, it's been held open. So then, after tonight's public hearing, staff will work to put the budget in order. And then so the timeline, Don, you want to highlight where we're?
So it is proposed that the budget be adopted on June 15th. That's your 1 p.m. meeting. We do have a regularly scheduled work session next week, June 8th. We would hope that if you have any major changes or whatnot, that you would now or tomorrow would be the time. But if there's something that did pop up, that would be for us the deadline if we wish to get something passed by June 15th.
Of course, there's always, not that I'm hoping that this happens, but there have been times, and I've been part of boards where we have had to extend, instead of voting it on the 15th, you may have to you got to the end of the month. We had to go over to the next week, but I don't foresee that happening. But
The only thing I would request is I have conference and stuff that week, and so that if that was the case, then there's a week at the end of June that I would request to that need to happen that week.
all right.
I have one little comment. Could you, either at your county manager's report tonight, would you, Ms. Fox, go over that situation before the public has a chance to give their comments?
Yes.
That way we can.
clarify.
Yes.
Yes, that's a great idea. I would just want to express my appreciation. I know Commissioner Matt Mahan has said that the work that you all have done has been amazing and so appreciated.
All right, unless no one else has anything that we need to discuss budget-wise, we'll wait till tonight and hear what the public has to say. Maybe there'll be some folks speak. Have a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
For a second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
See you at 5:55.
All right.